Hi, Brian Lehrer here. Up next, Brian Lehrer Weekend. 3 of our favorite segments from the week packaged together for you to listen to on the weekend. So enjoy, and I'll see you back on the radio Monday at 10 a.m. on WNYC and WNYC.org. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. All right, how many of you stayed up last night to watch the biggest comeback in NBA Finals history after the Knicks were losing by 29 points? Later in the show, we'll play a very viral social media rhyme by a super fan of the Knicks and of the city, and we'll invite you to create a version of it. Have you seen the video of the guy after Game 3 who shouted into a camera in the middle of a crowd, "My mayor Muslim, my bagel's Jewish, my Christian Dior, Knicks in 4. Well, they didn't win the series in 4 games, but they can still win it in 5. My mayor Muslim, my bagel's Jewish, my Christian Dior, Knicks in 4. It went so viral. So here's the way you can play, folks, if you're into it. Come up with a rhyme that ends with the words Knicks in 5. Again, since the Knicks could win the championship in 5 games now, come up with a rhyme that ends with the word Knicks in 5 and get ready to call in with it at around 11:45 this morning. We'll do this around the last 15 minutes of the show. My mayor is socialist. Here's an example. I made this up. My mayor is socialist. My tech firms are brocialist. My watch party's my hive. Knicks in 5. Or maybe my city loves humor. Might be souring on Schumer. Brunson and Kat bring us alive. Knicks in 5. Want one more? You're for Zoran and Daria Lisa, but today you can even love Sliwa because the city's unified and alive with the hopes of Knicks in 5. Something like that. Pretty silly, right? But there are some samples. Now breathe your own creativity into it and get ready to call in with it at the end of the show. A little rhyme, the cheers on the team and the city, ending with the words Knicks in 5. I know you all are creative. You've shown it so many times on this show, and you're going to kill it. So go to your notepads and write, and come back at around 12 o'clock. Now, I wonder these days how many of you will just ask ChatGPT or Claude or some other AI tool to write this for you. Don't do that. You don't have to strive to rhyme Knicks in 5. It just takes a few clicks to rhyme Knicks in 6. Here's a recent Wall Street Journal headline kind of to that effect. It says, your work team is now a pod and your coworkers are AI agents. Your work team is now a pod and your coworkers are AI agents. But here's another headline from the same reporter who's going to join us in a sec. And this is for those of you who assume AI is only going to destroy jobs. This headline is from Tuesday. Manhattan's red-hot office market poised for its best year since 2000. And the article starts with, the hot Manhattan office market is on pace this year for its best leasing performance since 2000. Back then, .com startups helped fuel demand. This time around, it's AI. But wait, if AI is supposed to be, the alien that'll devour everybody's job, why is it causing companies to set up shop in office spaces at the fastest rate since the Knicks were led by Patrick Ewing? Let's talk about that and other reporting by our guest, the Wall Street Journal's Isabel Basquet. She covers AI and the various ways it is transforming business, culture, and society. Isabel, thanks for coming on. Welcome to WNYC.
Thank you so much for having me.
So how hot is Manhattan's office market? Give us some numbers that give us a clue.
Yeah, you could say it's hotter than the Knicks. AI companies leased 1 million square feet of Manhattan office space just in the first quarter of this year. That's a huge uptick from last year. That's more than they leased in all of 2025. We're seeing some pretty big leases. OpenAI and Anthropic have... OpenAI has 90,000 square feet in Soho at the Puck Building. Anthropic, we hear is nearing a deal for 500,000 square feet in the Hudson Square area.
Which happens to be where WNYC is, by the way. So I guess the cost of lunch out is about to go up. But go ahead.
Yeah, 100%. These startups love sort of the trendy downtown vibe. But yeah, I mean, they are rushing into New York City. They want to be close to their customers. They want to sell to the big finance companies and law firms and consultancies that are here. And they're really excited about that in-office presence. So we're seeing a huge boom there.
But wait, wasn't it just a couple of years ago that economists were talking about the New York City doom loop, where, to remind people of that phrase, remote work and companies leaving the city were going to decimate the tax base, causing a reduction in city services and therefore quality of life. So then more businesses would leave, taking even more tax money, causing even more reductions in services, and on down the doom scroll rabbit hole.
It's really interesting to see the way the tech industry at least, has done this complete 180 on remote work. The AI companies and the tech companies that I talk to in this city, a lot of them have a 5-day in-office mandate, which is more than we have. And they don't even need the mandate in a lot of ways. These people, they want to come into the office. There's so much excitement around the AI industry and what they're building and what they're creating. And they all want to get there and do it in person together. So yeah, I mean, these folks are grinding away in the office 5 days a week, sometimes 6-7 days a week. They're there late at night. They're ordering pizzas. I have to say, some of these offices are pretty nice and have some pretty well-stocked kitchens and bar areas and amenities. So that probably helps a little bit as well. But yeah, we are seeing a huge focus on in-person work here.
I would guess a lot of 20-somethings who maybe felt so isolated the way they were locked down during COVID, and what you just described with putting in all these amenities. It does remind me of the late 90s when Google was putting free food in buffets around the office and ping pong tables and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely seen a ping pong table or two lately. Really decadent restaurants. I mean, it's not just tech. I mean, look at the new JP Morgan headquarters and, the bars and restaurants and endless shopping there. I mean, it kind of reminds you of an airport terminal even. There's an idea that you want to make these offices beautiful places to be. I think for the startups as well, there's an element of having an in-person office, and being in the in-person office gives them a sense of legitimacy. A lot of the reason these companies are in New York is because they want to sell to, again, like the big enterprises in New York, and they want to invite clients into the office, clients who may be wary of, just a small new AI startup, and show them, we're here, we're real, we have an office, we are grinding, we are a legitimate company, and you can trust us. So I think that's another part of it. So
now the city comptroller's office has a webpage called Doom Loop or Boom Loop. So if we're in a Manhattan office boom loop, Isabel, how much is it because of AI? Yeah, it's not, AI is still a small percentage of overall commercial leasing in the city. I think last year it was probably 2%. And if we, go with the .com comparison and we look back to, the first quarter of 2000, it was bigger than that. It was closer to a quarter. And some of those tech companies were, there was almost more tech leasing than leasing by finance companies. So it's still modest now, I would say, in New York. But it's growing fast. And why New York? I mean, supposedly the election of New York's tax the uber rich mayor is going to be causing businesses to flee to Texas, and start rooting for the San Antonio Spurs instead of the Knicks, or to Palm Beach in the billionaire-friendly arms of Mar-a-Lago and Ron DeSantis. So why New York? Yeah, I think for the AI companies in particular, AI is a little different from previous waves of technology that were more consumer focused, because I think AI has a lot of applications for the business world. So a lot of the AI companies here are developing
AI solutions that are meant to be used by lawyers, or AI solutions that are meant to be used by bankers, or AI solutions that are meant to be used by real estate agents and things like that. And so I think like they come to New York because they want to be face to face with the big enterprises, the big companies that are here to, show them how this stuff works in person and really sell them on it. I think there's, probably more there's more activity in San Francisco. I think that's still the city where leasing by AI startups represents, the lion's share. But the companies that are working on what they call applied AI, or, the applications of AI for business, they want to be here in New York because that's where all their customers are.
And this has been true for a long time. For listeners who don't know, yes, San Francisco, really Silicon Valley, has been the number one center for tech jobs, obviously, since the beginning of, what we consider the modern tech era. But New York has been number two for a long time, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting to think about New York's tech industry and the tech industry in the Bay Area. And I think, both were hit by COVID. I think, what I hear is that the West Coast and the Bay Area was maybe hit a little harder by COVID in terms of remote work. Maybe it took a little bit longer to bounce back, whereas, New York is seeing a huge influx of, AI companies both being started here and moving here, a huge influx of venture capital activity. And I think in San Francisco, you have all the AI companies that are building solutions, but you have fewer of the customers buying them. And I think when a lot of companies start in San Francisco, and then I think they'll move here, or they'll open a second office here. And I think, again, it's because they want to start selling into major customers, and New York is still in many places the go-to place to do that.
Yeah, it was Silicon Valley, and then people used to say, oh, and Boston is emerging as the number two, or Charlotte, or wherever, these new hubs, Pittsburgh. But really, New York quickly became number two and has been there right behind Silicon Valley for a long time. And now, from a New York perspective, very encouraging, if people think this is a good thing, that AI companies, if there have to be AI companies, that they're locating here. Listeners, help us and help Isabelle Bousquet from the Wall Street Journal report these stories. If you work in real estate or with an AI or other company that is currently expanding into more office space in Manhattan, tell us a little bit of your story. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. What company are you with? Where are they renting? What's the vision of possibilities, meaning the number of jobs they think they might create? Same thing if you work in commercial real estate. From that end of the deal, you're really well positioned to help report this story. What happened to the doom loop? Who's fueling this boom loop? People who work in commercial real estate. 212-433-WNYC. Call or text 212-433-9692. And we're going to get to another major story of Isabelle's from just recently, and you can help us report that too. The one called Your Work Team is Now a Pod and Your Co-Workers Are AI Agents. I mentioned it in the intro. Your work team is now a pod and your co-workers are AI agents. Are you being put on a team with robots? I'm asking that question literally. Tell us how, and how you're integrating, how it's working out. Do you say thank you after a robot performs a task? I almost did it with a customer service AI agent on the phone the other day. So would you like me to connect you to blah, blah, blah? And I almost said, yes, thank you. But then I realized, wait, I'm talking to a robot. So I just said yes. Do you go out for beers or coffee together after work? 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text, or just with any questions on these things for Isabelle Bousquet, who covers AI and society for the Wall Street Journal. Questions always welcome. Today on the Manhattan office market, or working side by side with AI agents, 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. While some calls are coming in, I will note another headline of yours from April, Isabel, relating to the office market. Why AI startup offices in New York City are flashy, but mostly empty. And that article says AI firms are rushing to grab Manhattan's most coveted office space, but desks outnumber employees. Desks outnumber employees. So take us further into that. How big is that gap between desks and humans who work at them?
Yeah, this is a really interesting dynamic because these are some of the fastest growing companies out there right now, and they want office space for all the reasons we talked about, but a lot of them are thinking about big hiring plans this year. They want to double, triple, quadruple in terms of headcount in the next 12 months, and so they're thinking about, well, what's the size of office I might need in 2 years if this is a 2-year lease term and they're renting offices that big, even if they only have 1 or 2 people that work there today. I think the craziest example I found of this was, this one company in this beautiful 3,000 square foot Soho loft space. It's almost $30,000 a month. And this founder, signed a 12-month lease when the company was just him and one other person. And, I went there and it was so beautiful, but there were only like 4 or 5 people working. And I was just so fascinated by this idea that, they have all this space because, they're well funded, they're well capitalized, they can spend on it. Again, they're spending all this time in the office, so they want to do it, in a beautiful space surrounded by, couches and the Xbox and pretty plants and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, on one hand, I think it's, there's, they have the money and they want to rent big spaces because they can. And then on the other hand, I think they're planning for future growth and they are hiring like crazy. There's one legal AI startup called Harvey in the city. And I went to their office, and the first thing the receptionist said to me was, "Oh, are you a new hire?" And it was a day when there were just so many, a dozen new hires coming through the door. So, yeah, I think they opened their first New York office in 2024, and they had 36 people here at the time. Now they have more than 300, and they just signed a new lease for 185,000 square feet at One Madison. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic because, some of the offices do feel quite empty, but they say they're going to grow. And on some level, I do believe it because, we've seen that happen.
And we should say you do report also on the risk that this is like the late 90s .com office boom, which of course led to the .com bust when that speculative bubble burst because it was so speculative. Sounds kind of like what you're describing now. So what's the parallel scenario that may come from this?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to ignore that parallel, I think. These companies are, they're leasing spaces way beyond their headcount. In some cases, they're prioritizing scale and market share over immediate profits. That said, I think it's not totally analogous. I think there are some clear differences. One is that I think landlords learn their lesson a little bit the first time around. They're putting a lot of scrutiny on the companies they lease to. They want to look over their business plans, their financials, their, cash flow, income statements, things like that. And, they're thinking about, am I going to give this lease almost as, would I invest in this company? And I think the other difference is these businesses, while there is, some element of just, growing a little beyond their britches, they do have real customers. I think AI has moved fast into deployment, into the enterprise. The big companies out there are spending like crazy on it. We hear, Fortune 100 CEOs talking about this all the time. So there is money going towards them. That said, again, I think there's probably room for some consolidation and, some companies might make it and some companies might not. But yeah, it'll be interesting.
It's popping a little bit on the phones in our text thread of all things. my little reference to not thanking the AI robot.
Oh, really?
On the phone.
Yeah.
Listener writes, I'll read one example. Here's a text. Brian, with 3 exclamation points. Of course you should thank your robot coworkers. You want them to spare you when the robot overlords take over.
That's
Right.
so funny. Yeah.
Aaron and Nyack. Esteban in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Hi, Esteban.
Hi, Brian. I'm just calling to ask what percent of this boom in office spaces is due to the proliferation of co-working spaces, which seem, we began with WeWork, Industrious, IWG, The Yard. There's a million of them convene. They're popping up everywhere. So is that a contributing factor?
Really interesting question, especially because WeWork is seen as a failure. This idea that a space could open that's, renting a few desks here, a few desks there, in their big open space, to startups that only have a few employees. But I think we consider WeWork something that failed, but Isabel, fill us in.
Yeah. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I will say a lot of startups I talk to start out in a WeWork or similar co-working type space. And then once they've been there for 6 months or so, they, look for a formal office from there. So I think it's definitely a really popular mode for AI companies to start out. I think after that, they want to sort of grow and, plant seeds in their own space. But, and another interesting phenomenon is, we were talking about how some of these startups have office spaces that are way bigger than their current headcounts. Sometimes they'll share it with other AI startups. Sometimes they'll charge for it and sometimes they won't, and it'll just be more casual. But we are just seeing these, sort of people just want to get out there and they want to work in person and they're happy to do it together.
Co-working lives. All these stories seem to imply, I guess I'd call it the big question, which I guess we can't answer yet, of how much AI is going to create jobs or destroy jobs. Some people argue it will create jobs in net numbers, but that's not the narrative that we usually hear. So how valid are the predictions that you're seeing as a reporter on this beat in either direction?
I ask myself this question every single day. This is the question. We hear AI will create jobs and it will destroy jobs. I think there's so much nuance on both sides of that. Are people losing their jobs to AI? Yeah, I think so. One example is call centers. Call centers are getting hugely automated. If you are someone who answered phone calls at a call center, now that job can be done by a robot, and you might be at a company that wants to invest in you and upskill you. They love the word upskill for another job, or you might be out of luck. So we are seeing that. On the other hand, when we see these sort of like mass layoffs happening across big corporations, and we hear the CEO saying we're leaning into AI efficiencies. I think there's an element of that is just sort of trying to use AI to cover up the fact that they're doing layoffs for other reasons. I think no company out there is so successful with AI that they can do a mass layoff and lose, 10 or 14% of their workforce at this point. I think that's just a myth.
In a minute, I want to move this conversation, which is kind of a segue from what you just said, to your other recent story. Your work team is now a pod and your coworkers are AI agents. But one more on this that you say you ask yourself every day about net creation of jobs or net destruction of jobs. Here's a really scary version of that, as described in a National Review article recently. I'm going to read from the lead paragraph. Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic, predicts that AI will displace half of all entry-level white-collar jobs. Jeffrey Hinton, the quote godfather of AI, warns of massive unemployment. Bill Gates believes that AI will make most jobs obsolete. Even Elon Musk thinks that work will eventually become optional, unquote. How much consensus is there on things like that? I guess you were just answering that question to some degree. But the Elon Musk quote at the end of that was really intriguing to me, that work will eventually become optional. That by itself doesn't account for, how people not working pay the rent and put food on the table. So is this the Andrew Yang government provides a guaranteed universal income scenario, or something more depressing, if you know?
Yeah. I mean, to answer your question, I don't think there's any consensus at this point. And yeah, you have that far out view that AI will literally automate everything that every person does in the economy, and it'll, digitally do all white collar jobs, and in the form of physical robots, it'll do all blue collar jobs, and there will be nothing left for humans to do, and we'll all sort of live in this universal basic income utopia and make art and be creative. I don't know. We've seen other technological revolutions in the past. And we can debate about how, analogous this is or isn't to those. But, the Industrial Revolution, for example, people moved on to other jobs. People moved on to other different kinds of work. And I think that's a large part of the argument we're seeing today is, jobs have to change. If AI can do, basic busy work, if AI can do a lot of that sort of first draft of writing software apps, that's maybe not a good use of people's time anymore. And, I do think that there is a massive change that's coming for the workforce, but I don't think we know exactly what it looks like yet, and I do think it'll be messy to try to figure it out.
Well, here's a jobs are going to change question from a listener. Listener writes, please forgive my ignorance, but I'm curious about what the AI in-office workers do. Is it marketing and sales-oriented work, and how will it grow to have more real humans in office?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything. I think these AI companies, every person who works at the company is there, whether it's the CEO and the founder, the C-suite, they're doing marketing, business development, they're managing their financial operations. One big role that we're seeing emerging as we talk about, the jobs AI is creating, this might be one example, but they have something called forward deployed engineers, which is this it's new, but it's not new, but it's getting more popular now. This idea that you have an engineer that will embed with your customers and help sort of customize and build your AI products to really suit those customer needs. So there's this AI for financial services company called Hebbia, for example. Like, they are hiring so many former bankers and private equity folks to come work for them, and they're calling them forward deployed bankers, and their job is to act as the go-between, sort of like big financial services stalwarts, and help them understand how to better use these cutting-edge AI tools.
And believe it or not, they're still coming in on thanking the AI customer service bots. I'll read one more. I always thank the robots. I like to stay in the habit of being kind. What if I then start to forget to thank the people around me? Writes Aided in New Jersey. So we'll put a pin in that topic for the moment. And when we come back from a break, we'll continue with Isabelle Bousquet from the Wall Street Journal. And we'll pivot to the ideas in her story. Your work team is now a pod, and your co-workers are AI agents. Stay with us. Brian Lehrer on WNYC with Isabelle Bousquet, who covers AI, not just AI in business, also AI in society and culture for the Wall Street Journal. And you at 212-433-WNYC, call or text. So yeah, now I want to ask you about your article. Your work team is now a pod, and your co-workers are AI agents. What's the premise of that story?
Yeah, a few things. One is that AI agents are increasingly being treated as members of the workforce, and jobs are increasingly transforming such that you may no longer be doing the work that you were traditionally doing, but you are managing an agent or a team of AI agents that are doing that work. So as a result, teams are getting smaller and smaller than they used to be. I should say, when I was reporting this story, most of the focus was on software engineering teams specifically. And I think a lot of what we see in software is sort of an early example of what we could maybe see in other types of functions. And it's starting there because building software is something AI is very, very good at right now. It's one of the early killer use cases. So we're seeing a lot of disruption in these teams that were doing software development, and what used to maybe take a team of 15 people can now be done actually faster, maybe by a team of 2, 3, 4 people, and each of those people is managing their own AI agents.
People, by the way, may be confused by the word agents there, AI agents. How are you in the industry using that word?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's such an industry buzzword at this point, and honestly, I think the industry really lacks a consensus on actually what it means. But the core idea of an AI agent is it's something more than a chatbot. A chatbot like ChatGPT, you talk to it, you ask it a question, it gives you an answer back, you can have a conversation. An AI agent takes things further by taking some kind of action on your behalf. So you could tell an agent, go look up this data for me in this database, and then double check it with these requirements, and then build this software application, and then test the software application to make sure there are no bugs in it, and then just let me know when you're done. And it can go off and do work for, several hours. And then, it'll come back to you if it gets stuck or if it has a question, or it'll come back to you when it's done.
And so you're right. Companies are restructuring engineering teams into smaller, more nimble, cross-functional pods made up of humans and AI agents. I guess you just gave us one example. Is this a good example? You had a story called Inside BlackRock's AI Transformation, and it says BlackRock engineering chief Nish Ajitsaria envisions a future where AI agents handle most processes and humans work in smaller squads, use the word squads, to oversee them. Isabel, at least that makes clear that the humans are overseeing the AI agents, not the other way around. But maybe take us inside BlackRock a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it is really interesting. And I think, BlackRock is a company that is using AI a lot and has for a long time, but hasn't yet. And I don't think anyone has yet really exactly figured out how to execute on sort of the workforce transformation. So a lot of what they're doing at BlackRock is, it's similar to what we see at other firms, which is a focus on productivity tools and giving individuals the ability to build AI agents that can manage parts of their job and then oversee those agents. So, they have a new platform that is going to enable, anyone at the company to go onto this platform and build an agent that can do a part of your job and then run that and then share that throughout the company with other people who might want to use it. So I think that's sort of emblematic of what we're seeing across the industry. It's this early phase where everyone is starting to, on an individual level, experiment with AI and get more productive with AI. I think the question then becomes, once everyone at the company is automating parts of their job and using AI agents, what do they do with all that extra free time, and how do you direct them on what to do with it, and how do you consolidate teams. If people are so much more productive, teams can get smaller and they will get smaller. And that's what we hear from a lot of CEOs and CTOs. But I think there's some messiness in terms of once the teams get smaller, what do you do with the other people? And I think that's where the question of layoffs comes in. And,
Right.
there's a lot of talk about upskilling and reskilling them. And I hear the term higher order work or higher level work all the time. And that's what people are going to be promoted into. But it's still quite vague what that means. So I don't think we really know yet.
Couple of rhymes coming in. I'll just share them with you. People who are chiming in with these Loving New York and the Knicks rhymes in advance of our segment in about an hour. One says, now other things are coming in about AI, and they're blanking off my screen. Sorry. Where did it go? Here it is. It says, my old man watched with me, but didn't see Ananobi. It's good to be alive, Nixon 5. Another one says, when I shave, here it is. When I shave, I fear a nick. At Christmas, I jeer, Saint Nick. The bread I bake is always leaven. I predict it will be the Spurs in 7. Ooh,
Oh, no.
to that person.
That's a brutal ending.
Regina on Staten Island. Back to the serious stuff. You're on WNYC. Hi, Regina.
Hi there. How are you? My ears perked up at this discussion when you said that Elon Musk said there may not be a need for work anymore in the future. And so this is either a question or a comment. Can AI help cure homelessness? Can they, feed the hungry? Can they be in relational types jobs where we need people to be with elderly people and so on? I mean, I would love to see if AI could do something about homelessness and people on the street, but I would hate to see them work in all these other areas and we still have that problem. That's much more serious to me.
Regina, thank you for such an important question. And take it seriously, Isabel. Are any companies developing AI tools that can alleviate that kind of extreme inequality that we see in our city as much as we love it, whether the Knicks are winning or losing, and provide other kinds of human services like that, one way or another?
Yeah, this is such a good question because a lot of times we'll see the CEO tech gods get up there and preach that AI is going to solve all of humanity's problems and it's going to solve world hunger and it's going to solve homelessness. And yeah, sure, it might destroy humanity, but, we'll keep a tight lid on the guardrails to make sure that doesn't happen. And, somehow we're going to see all of these benefits and just, don't pay attention to the negatives. There's a lot of potential for AI to be used for good in these instances. I was talking to one governmental department about, can you use AI to make it easier to apply for benefits online? Because some of these applications are so confusing and abstruse. And I think, the government moves slowly in terms of technology adoption for a lot of reasons, a lot of bureaucracy and, they're just not the most technologically savvy. But I think the potential is there for AI to be able to do these things. I think it's more of a question now of how do we apply it and who is building those solutions and how do they get the funding for that and how do they get it into the government and how do they get those solutions used. So I think it's a really good question. It's something to pay attention to. I don't think we're seeing a lot of that yet, but I hope so.
Obviously, so many conversations to come as AI continues to become more prominent. So far, no matter what the people who want to resist it are saying, for better or worse, we are discussing on such a regular basis what's happening in business and real estate and employment, like today, what's happening with climate as a result, which we talked about on Tuesday's show, and all of these aspects as the AI revolution continues, and people have to figure out how to manage it or banish it, for better or for worse. Isabel Bousquet covers AI and society for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you again for having me.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. And for trans and gender nonconforming New Yorkers, the question of where to get medical care has gotten a lot more complicated this year. The Trump administration has been pressuring hospitals to stop offering gender-affirming care to minors and investigating the ones that do. Here in the city, two of the biggest hospital systems, NYU Langone and Mount Sinai, have pulled back that care for kids, and both are now caught up in a new wrinkle in this. It's federal subpoenas for their patients' records. Federal subpoenas for their patients, these minors' records. At the same time, the Mamdani administration said it's committed to protecting this care. The city is preparing to offer hormone therapy to trans adults at its own clinics, including a new health center in Corona, Queens. Tish James, the state attorney general, is telling NYU Langone, no, you have to continue offering this care. So at least that hospital is caught in between the federal and state governments. But what the Mamdani administration is offering to trans adults won't extend to minors, at least not yet, and advocates are watching closely as the city finalizes its budget at the end of the month to see if anything like that is in there. So here to walk us through some of this and to take your calls if you're involved in this at all as a trans person yourself, as a family member, as a medical provider, Caroline Lewis, healthcare reporter for WNYC and Gothamist. Hey, Caroline, welcome back.
Hi, Brian.
So let's talk about this subpoena issue. For people who don't know, last month, NYU Langone first raised the alarm bells when they announced that they received a subpoena for the medical records of patients under 18 who received gender-affirming care. Where is this subpoena coming from, and what's the rationale?
So the subpoena came from the U.S. District Attorney for Northern Texas, and it's actually one of many federal subpoenas from Trump's Justice Department that have been issued to hospitals under his second term. But lawyers I spoke to said this represented sort of an escalation because it was a federal grand jury subpoena, which is typically issued in a criminal case as opposed to a civil case. But, you know, it recently became public because it was included in a lawsuit, and I think it offered a lot of insight into what the administration is actually after, and it's really like a vast trove of records that they're seeking.
What do we mean by patient medical records? What kind of information is the DOJ actually looking to receive from these hospitals?
Yeah, so it's a variety of records and information. First they specifically said they want identifying information about minor patients who received services such as puberty blockers or hormone therapy over the past 6 years. The Trump administration refers to that as sex-rejecting procedures, but, many medical providers call it gender-affirming care or treatment for gender dysphoria. They're seeking the personnel files of anyone who provided or even billed for that care. And then they're also seeking a lot of documents that seem to be related to hospital practices around providing and billing for this care. So they want diagnostic codes. They want to know, what kind of informed consent was required, documents that parents signed off on. Were there any adverse events? So it's really vast.
And what's the risk to the patients, to the minors themselves or any family members or the medical providers? Why is there concern about this? What might the federal government do with this information that could actually hurt them?
We don't know. We don't know how it's going to be used, but I think, I spoke to parents who said, one parent said, well, my trans son has, a passport that has his correct gender marker on there. If they get his medical records, will they, next time he has to renew his passport, will they say, oh, actually, now you have to say you're female? Parents certainly raised concerns. Are they trying to come after us and charge us criminally in some way? But I think, what is clear is that the Trump administration is also trying to just get more information about hospitals' practices here. And I think, they have been building this case, since Trump took office to try to show that, gender-affirming care is just not legitimate and to try to, basically block hospitals from offering this care.
But they may have this policy dispute or, social values dispute on some level. But why is it the Justice Department seeking these medical records? When the Justice Department investigates something, it implies there might be criminal activity.
Yeah, I mean, the Justice Department has not directly commented on this, but like I said, they have had a broader campaign to try to block gender-affirming care in the Trump administration. And so it seems like this is just sort of one arm of that, on the HHS side, they've, proposed rules to block federal funding from going to hospitals that offer this care. And both Mount Sinai and NYU Langone actually pulled back on offering gender-affirming care to minors earlier this year, just in light of, possibly in light of those proposed rules, even though they were never finalized. And so this is another part of that. And so it might be that they're investigating the care. It might be that they're trying to have the intended effect of, chilling this type of care from being offered.
We should tell our listeners, and also to give you and your reporting credit, NYU Langone had announced that the Justice Department was seeking this, particular patient and provider information involving gender-affirming care for trans youth. But then last week, you broke the news that Mount Sinai received the same subpoena, but this time the information didn't reach you via announcement, right? So how did you get that story, and what do you think the significance is of there being yet another hospital being subpoenaed, and maybe the fact that they didn't announce it on their own?
Yeah, no, it was interesting. So NYU Langone, both hospitals had to legally had to inform patients that they were being subpoenaed under state shield laws. But NYU Langone, like you said, posted it online, was very transparent about it. And then, there was a class action lawsuit filed by trans New Yorkers and their parents to try to block these medical records from being shared. Mount Sinai, on the other hand, had social workers sort of individually calling up parents or patients directly saying, your medical records have been subpoenaed. They could be shared with the federal government. We're going to anonymize them. But they didn't put anything in writing. And when I initially reached out to a spokesperson, she declined to comment or, even confirm that there was a subpoena. Eventually, more outlets reached out and they were forced to say that, yes, the subpoena exists. And they made it seem like less clear that they were definitely going to comply. But it just struck me that, they were not being transparent about this. Even lawyers from Lambda Legal, which filed this class action suit against NYU Langone, said they had heard rumors that Mount Sinai had a similar subpoena, and they tried to word the lawsuit so it would apply to them too, but they weren't even able to confirm until we sort of forced them to say it via our reporting. And so it just struck me as like a different level of transparency.
And listeners, anybody involved in this issue personally want to call in or text 212-433 WNYC 212-433-9692 with our healthcare reporter Caroline Lewis, who was involved in breaking the Mount Sinai portion of this story, as you were just hearing. Tell us what you think this means for you or your loved one or your patients, 212-433-9692, or what anybody can do about it. We are getting some texts already, several of which are asking a version of the same question, which is, isn't this a violation of HIPAA, the medical privacy law, that the government can just come looking at your personal medical records?
I will say, I think that, I need to dig more into exactly what the HIPAA laws say about this. I think, the DOJ made the case in the subpoena to NYU Langone that there's exceptions that they're able to exploit here. But certainly the class action lawsuit argues that this does violate physician-patient confidentiality under state law, as well as constitutional protections around privacy and, searches and seizures. And so I think there's definitely conflicting legal arguments here.
Let's take a phone call from Annabelle in Brooklyn. You're on WNYC. Hi, Annabelle.
Hello. I'm in community with parents whose kids have been caught up in the subpoena. Amongst these parents, trust with NYU and Mount Sinai has been shattered, and people have been looking to New York City admin for a proactive response. But a fundamental concern is the lack of communication to and from the mayoralty on this crisis as a whole. What advice would you give to the city government to establish better communication with those directly affected?
That's a good question. I mean, I think in general, there's often this feelings when issues like this come up that, policymakers might be trying to help, but they're not necessarily talking directly to those affected and involving them. And so I think that's always, a valuable thing to have people's voices who are on the ground. Certainly the Mamdani administration, Mayor Mamdani has said he's putting up $15 million over the next 2 years, or that's what he's proposed in his city budget to expand gender-affirming care. He said he wants to provide services specifically for kids. But, it was interesting. There was a city council hearing on the health budget the other day, and the health commissioner said, that the administration is still really figuring out how to provide that care or expand access to that care without getting federal backlash, without having federal funds clawed back. And so clearly there's, some strategizing going on behind the scenes. And I think we have to really see what comes out of this.
Annabelle, thank you very much. As a follow-up, Mayor Mamdani was on the show last week, and we had a caller named Reina, the parent of a trans child who lost care at NYU and is now caught up in the federal subpoena. And she told the mayor her community needs more than words, concrete legal protections, and city dollars are what they need. And when we pressed them on how specifically the city would reopen access for trans kids, here's 20 seconds of what he said.
The $15 million that we have committed is funding that would unlock exactly that. And it speaks to the fact that whether it's Reina's experience or so many others across the city, there are explicit consequences from both the cruelty that we're seeing from the federal government's policies and the decisions that are being made by private healthcare institutions here in New York City.
So we just heard the mayor make his case for that $15 million of city funding being meaningful. You report it's a steep drop from the $65 million he pledged as a candidate. But I guess I would repeat the same question that I asked him that I don't think he quite gave a specific answer to, which is, even with that money, how does it unlock the care for future trans minors if these hospitals are too scared because of what's going on in Washington to provide it?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways the city could go. The health commissioner did just announce that city-run clinics are going to be providing hormone therapy for adults and not yet for adolescents because, again, they're still sort of figuring out what makes sense. So they could try to offer that care themselves. They could provide funding to nonprofit providers or community groups that are offering this care or to maybe expand their services in light of some hospitals pulling back. Like I know that, Callan Lord and Planned Parenthood offer some of these services to adolescents, but it might not be as robust as what Mount Sinai and NYU Langone were offering. Like I know at Planned Parenthood, for instance, they have hormone therapy for 16 and 17-year-olds, but not necessarily for, care for younger children. So I think there's different routes. And, I know the federal government threatened funding for hospitals, not yet for other types of providers. So maybe they want to sort of roll the dice and see if it's, if other types of providers can provide this care without that backlash.
Here's a text that I think comes from the same parent who got to ask the mayor the question on the show last week. And she's putting it here into an even broader perspective. Listener writes, as a parent whose child is caught up in this subpoena, I want to remind everybody that my child's care is legal and protected in New York. If the government can do this to trans kids, they can do this to anyone. Abortion care, antidepressants, vaccines are all under attack by the federal government. Trans kids are being used to erode privacy rights and medical norms. And yeah, she did sign it, Raina, in Brooklyn, so that's probably the same person. But Caroline, that's, a pretty sweeping theory there, that this isn't just about the dispute over what's legitimate to do medically to minors, but a larger invasion of the right to privacy in the medical world, moving toward some of the conservative agenda to limit vaccines and abortion care and other things. I don't know if you've done any reporting that would suggest it's in that broader context, but what are you thinking, hearing that text?
Well, I do think it's relevant to talk about the significance because, trans people are such a small minority and trans children are an even smaller minority. And so some people might feel like, well, this doesn't affect me, or it doesn't even affect that many New Yorkers, right? Even though New York has been traditionally known as like a haven for LGBTQ plus people. But I think there is that argument that this is part of a broader trend. We do have a state shield law related to gender affirming care, and we have shield laws related to abortion care because we've also seen, efforts from other entities in other states to try to prosecute, New York providers who are like sending pills across state lines, right? So there is this idea that even though, that we can't necessarily decide that we protect certain types of health care, because there might be efforts by the federal government or by out-of-state entities to try to erode that care. And so I think there is this idea that that there's a need to sort of stand up to those efforts.
You reported that New York lawmakers, including Representatives Gerald Nadler and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are urging NYU Langone to, quote, fight these ill-conceived subpoenas to the fullest extent of the law, unquote. Maybe I'll get to ask the 5 Democrats running to succeed Gerald Nadler, what they would say about that when I'm one of the moderators in that debate tonight. But what could that fight look like? What do you think they mean by that specifically? And do either NYU or Mount Sinai have an appetite for that fight based on your reporting?
I think what that means is that they should not comply in advance. I do think there's a sense that both Mount Sinai and NYU Langone complied in advance with federal threats to their funding that never really came to fruition. And there's this, feeling that they should not comply in advance with the subpoenas. Both hospitals have, I don't think either hospital has, sent medical records yet. Both have framed it as like something that could happen. But certainly, I asked one city council member, what does it mean to sort of fight back? And this was Tiffany Caban, and she said they should lawyer up. They should, fight in court the way that patients are.
Emily in Maplewood, you're on WNYC. Hi, Emily.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for taking my call. I am calling because I moved to New Jersey from Texas, and we have seen what has played out in Texas. In 2023, when we left, records were being subpoenaed at hospitals there that ended up being turned over. Texas, of course, put up zero fight. And now they're opening a detransitioning center, and they have names of parents and youth of transgender Texans. And that's terrifying. I ultimately think that's what's playing out in New York City, where they're going to come in slowly, step by step, and the Trump administration will pretend that, this is not just to have a roster of names of who trans individuals are, but I think ultimately that is what they are wanting. Emily, that when the time comes...
Go ahead.
Yes.
They can do the same thing.
I'm just worried that when the time comes, they're going to have this list of names.
Yeah, and what's your concern about what they could do that's harmful to the individuals involved with that list of names? I mean, one could say, all right, open a detransitioning center. Some people will want to detransition. That's their right, just as getting the initial gender affirming
Yeah.
transitional care is their right. But what can they do with the names that's harmful? Do you have a sense of that from your experience in Texas?
Um, yes. So in Texas, parents who seek gender affirming care, even through a therapist, is considered child abuse. So your children can be removed from your home. When we left Texas, Ken Paxton, the goal that was communicated to Child and Family Services at that time, or Child Protective Services, was you automatically open a case for child abuse if someone calls suspecting that a child is receiving gender affirming care. And it just includes going to therapy, not even like physical transition. And so I think that if, ultimately in the future, if they actually get through these, we made it past the first step, these hospitals are backing out and they're going step by step. The ultimate goal we've seen play out in Texas is that it's considered child abuse. They can remove the children from the home. They can be placed in foster care or group homes, which is truly absurd. We're just talking about medical care for our kids that is desperately needed. I do think, of course, people can transition if they need to. That is an astronomically tiny amount of people who choose to detransition. And the only process to detransition youth is just stop taking the puberty blockers, stop the hormones. There is no need to seek further medical treatment if you decide to detransition. So no medical intervention is needed. There doesn't need to be specified care for that.
Center.
You just stop taking the medication.
Is this why you moved from Texas to New Jersey, having a trans daughter, because you may have been
100%.
declared a criminal under Texas law?
Yes, we had to leave because we could have had our daughter taken away from us. We were not able to sell our house and leave until a couple months after the law went into effect. And I sent my daughter to school with a script for her to read to Child Protective Services if they showed up at her school to interview her. Wow. And it was terrifying. We spent 2 months of sending her to school that way, and we left. We didn't know anyone in New Jersey. We had to leave our entire supportive family and friends, our community that was beautiful, and we came to New Jersey by ourselves just to be able to be safe and keep our daughter in our family and with us.
Wow, that is some story, Emily. A tragic story. I hope you get a lot of community support there in Maplewood.
We do.
Good. Can I ask one other? And moving there when you don't even know anybody there, you said. I mean, it's just incredible what you had to do because of this. I want to ask you one more thing, sort of a curious question, if you even have a sense of this. Why? Okay. What do you think motivates those who would want to label you this way and other families with trans minors? If what we're talking about is parents who love their children making what is always a very difficult decision. I'm sure it was not easy for you to say, hey, let's go through a trans process of whatever kind you were doing. You're making this decision because you love your child and you want to support your child, and you're doing it in collaboration with medical professionals, like in New York, the people who might work at Mount Sinai or NYU Langone. And yet, there are those who want to criminalize this anyway. What do you think actually motivates them? Is it religion? Is it what? You have a guess, a sense, an opinion?
Yes. I mean, that's truly a huge question where if we start pulling the string, I can go on. If I really pull the string, we'll be here for like 2 hours. But I think immediately it is fear and lack of understanding. And I think that I think fear and lack of understanding are the individuals who support the Trump administration. The administration themselves, I think its terror is a primary goal, right? I don't really believe that there is a single politician or a single person in the Trump government who genuinely care. Like, if they heard my daughter's story, they do not care either way whether she is trans or gets medical care. But as long as their base is terrified, as long as everyone is terrified, they get to retain power. I think it's about power. I think it's about control over people and wanting people to perhaps go back to some idea that there was once a time in this country where men were men and women were women, and men worked and women raised children, and we had people in the labor force that were not highly educated. I think that ultimately that's what they believe is making America great again. And as long as people are living their beautifully diverse and powerful truths, they don't have that labor force. They don't have those clear roles for every single family. And they don't want to, have people actually living their personal lives and not contributing to the capitalist framework that we have, right? Like, capitalism isn't going to be sustainable as long as everyone is self-actualized and allowing this diversity in our culture and our humanity.
I didn't think you would get to that global a critique, but Emily, thank you.
I told you I could pull this thread.
I know, for 2 hours.
This thread really goes hard.
Well, I don't think anybody listening to your call could doubt that you have the best interest of your child at heart. At very least, we really, really appreciate your call. Go ahead. You wanted to tag it with one thing?
Can I make one more comment? My daughter is getting to live this very joyful childhood, and I really just want to comment that, these kids out here, these trans kids, maybe we get this narrative from people who don't understand that these are depressed, miserable children who are just tormented and bullied and, actually supporting their transness is continuing this dark mental health journey. But actually the opposite is true. All of the supported trans kids I know are just these incredible, beautiful kids who are delightful and such the brightest spot in my life, and getting to witness them, my child and her friends. So I just really wanted to speak against that narrative that there is just this real darkness attached to the trans experience.
Thank you for doing that. How old is your daughter now?
She's about to be 14.
Emily, thank you very much. Good luck to you and your family. And wow, Caroline, what were you thinking listening to that call?
I mean, that was incredible. It made me want to, really do a bigger deep dive into what's happening in places like Texas. That was such an incredible story. And it also, made me think there at the end about the parents that I've spoken to in recent days, about what their children's journey has looked like. And, I think what everyone sort of emphasized is this was not an overnight decision that they needed, hormones. It was the result of years of experience where one parent said, my child has identified as a boy since he was 3 years old and could basically say, call me a boy. And it took until he was maybe 14 or whatever to start getting hormones, 14, 15. Another parent was telling me it was a very different story, but similarly a long journey to getting this care, where he said his child who's now 20, around 12 or so, was, really depressed, suicidal, self-harming. And it took years of therapy to get, this child to say, that they didn't feel like a boy or a girl, and to ultimately, get approved for the care that they got, which they, are getting at Mount Sinai. And so I think it really just speaks to that, this idea that these parents know their children well, and that it's not just like something that was pushed on them.
I'm sure, though, that some listeners reacted to the end of the call, hearing how young her child is, 13, about to turn 14, and already going through some kind of medical gender-affirming care. But for you as a healthcare reporter who's looked into this, I guess, can you explain how it's complicated at that age? Because is it true that if you don't do something by the time of puberty or the earliest moments of puberty, then it's too late?
I think it varies for each person. Just like, I think the idea is that, the idea of puberty blockers is that you can give them when they're younger, 12 or 13, and then that'll sort of hold off puberty while they decide, if they want to go on hormones or take some other step. And the idea is that, then you can discontinue it, and it's sort of reversible if they decide, not to proceed. But I also have talked to people, even teens who, throughout reporting, who have said, who have identified for a while as trans, but never did any medical intervention and, eventually decided to go on hormones or something like that. So I think it really varies person to person.
You know what? I want to extend this by one caller past our scheduled time, because we have Elizabeth in Inwood, who says she works at Mount Sinai and may be able to help you report the Mount Sinai story, Caroline.
That's great.
Elizabeth, thank you for calling in. What's your relationship to this issue?
Hi, Brian. Thanks for taking my call. I just want to say quickly before I begin that I'm speaking on my own behalf, not on the behalf of Mount Sinai. I was one of the lead clinicians of the Gender Care Center at Mount Sinai for many years. I'm no longer in that position. And I was responsible for quite a lot of the care that was delivered there during my tenure. I do adults, so I was not directly involved with the adolescent care. Obviously all of this is infuriating because the evidence is really very, very clear that interrupting puberty, particularly in people that are assigned male at birth, is really critical to positive outcomes. There are certain structural changes in the skeleton and other places that once they occur, they really can't be reversed. We have some surgical techniques and things that can sort of abate them later on in life. But the best chance that we have for people to assimilate into their internal gender, their gender identity, is by preventing the sex development in the first place. And so when we talk about this scary delivering gender care in adolescence, what we're actually just talking about is delaying a puberty that would cause them to develop into the wrong body. If the person were to choose, a family, to stop that treatment, they would simply go along the path that they would have. So if a sex-assigned male at birth were to delay puberty for a year, they would, and then decide that that no longer fit them, they would simply then begin their male puberty again. There would be a delay in terms of maybe social development and, not keeping up with their peers and so forth. I will say that happens very, very rarely, but it's not a zero number of people that decide to, stop that treatment. The numbers of people who identify young are not the majority, but the numbers are increasing. But the main point is that by targeting the adolescents what they're doing, in my opinion, is they are taking away the best possible chance at integrating completely and fully for especially people assigned sex male at birth into an adult life that is sort of integrated fully, invisible. It's almost like they're purposely creating a situation where forever forward it's going to be possible to identify this class of people as transgender. That's my first point. And the second, I'll say.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
go ahead. Real quick.
Yes.
Real
No,
quick.
I was just going to
add make a second point.
Yeah, I was just going to say really quickly, the other part of that is that it seems like the conversation never encompasses trans men, trans boys. You know, everybody is focusing on trans girls when there's this whole other cohort, and that makes me think that this is a wider issue around marginalizing women, and that the easiest way to marginalize women is to pick off the most vulnerable of the population, which are trans women. But I'll stop there.
Caroline, do you, as a reporter on this beat, have any question for this caller?
I have a lot of questions. I'd love to follow up afterwards, actually. Yeah, I think in general,
happy to share my information off air.
That would be great. Yeah, I think there's just so many angles to this. Like, I am curious, you know, behind the scenes how hospitals are handling these things. I also have a lot of like medical questions, and I've obviously done research on transgender care over the years. But like, still, I think that the science on this is also still like evolving, and there's a large consensus among major medical groups that like this type of care is valid, but like I also am so curious. I still have questions too, you know.
All right, so I will let you two connect off the air. If you want to leave your number, Elizabeth, with our producer, and we will leave it there for now. And Caroline, will be interesting to hear what you might learn about, you know, things she probably wouldn't be comfortable as a Mount Sinai employee saying publicly about how the hospital is planning to fight or trying to continue their care programs despite currently suspending it under threat from Washington, or what to do with the subpoenas for the individual's medical records. But we will leave it there for now with Caroline Lewis.
The economy never stops shifting. Markets move, global trade gets disrupted, and policies shift. And all these factors have a tremendous influence on the ways we live and work. I'm Kimberly Adams, host of Marketplace Morning Report, a daily 10-minute podcast where a team of award-winning reporters helps you make sense of our evolving economy. Listen to Marketplace Morning Report on your favorite podcast app.
Healthcare reporter for WNYC in Gotham is Caroline. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brian.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, and we're going to wrap up this week with your non-soccer tourist tips for people coming to New Jersey for the World Cup. Again, your non-soccer tourism tips for people coming to New Jersey from around the world for the World Cup. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text Jerseyans. New York is trying to steal the spotlight, right? FIFA is advertising the games here, advertising the games as taking place in New York and New Jersey. They're not. They're taking place in New Jersey. And did you see they even temporarily renamed MetLife Stadium the New York, New Jersey Stadium? That's because of rules that FIFA has that no company branding, in this case MetLife, may be associated, with FIFA soccer matches unless they're an official sponsor of some kind. But all the games are actually happening in North Jersey, if you haven't noticed. So if you fly into Newark Airport for the games, you don't really need to go into New York at all. And staying in New Jersey makes a lot of sense when NJ Transit's special match day fare to the stadium is running at the now discounted price of $98 round trip. But it's safe to say that many of our visitors will be a lot less familiar with your local area, wherever you are in New Jersey, than they are with Manhattan or elsewhere on that side of the river. So, listeners, in North Jersey, this one's for you. And obviously not to diss New York, but this one's for you, North Jersey, because this tournament is in your hometown of the Meadowlands area. So your non-soccer tourism tips for visitors from around the world coming for the World Cup. Jerseyans, what do you want to shout out, especially in the northern part of the state, right? Maybe people aren't going down to near Philadelphia or anything like that. So North Jersey tourism tips especially, 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. And we should say that the World Cup is a big economic opportunity for North Jersey cities and townships, not just for New York, even though that does get most of the press. Oh, are the tourists filling up the New York hotels? Well, not as much as expected, or the recent reports. But what about New Jersey localities? Local governments are trying to seize the moment, from what I read. Earlier this week on Morning Edition, maybe you heard Michael Hill talked with the president of Newark's tourism arm called Newark Happening. They put together a free Kick It in Newark mobile pass with themed trails and itineraries to help tourists explore the area. One is self-care themed in case a visitor needs to find, let's say, a barber or get their nails done. There's also a historic Newark trail, a black-owned business crawl, they're calling it, and an international eats trail. And speaking of food, the city has timed Newark Restaurant Week to line up with the World Cup. So listeners, help us put together an itinerary for your city or town. It can be more from Newark or from anywhere in the area. Where should tourists go in Jersey City, Secaucus, East Rutherford itself? Business owners, are you hosting any World Cup events or welcoming visitors from around the world in some other way? It is for you, New Jersey listeners, for your non-soccer tourism tips for visitors from around the world. Call or text 212-433 WNYC. Roll out your welcome at 212-433-9692. We'll take them right after this. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. By the way, speaking of soccer, coming up at noon on All of It, they'll talk to the author of a new novel about a Haitian-born sports fan living in Harlem who just happened to lead the U.S. men's soccer team to an unlikely win at the 1950 World Cup. Plus, beach etiquette, from obstructive umbrellas to feeding the seagulls. Get some helpful tips for being a good beach neighbor, coming up at noon on All of It. And all right, now to your non-soccer tourism tips for visitors from around the world coming to New Jersey. And let's begin with Judd in Union. Judd, you're on WNYC. What you got? Hi.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to extol some of the virtues of Newark. I know it doesn't always have the greatest reputation, but the Newark Museum of Art has the largest collection of Tibetan art in the Western Hemisphere. There's an amazing cathedral in Newark, I think one of the largest in North America. And you just got some great food, Portuguese food, some delis. So I really think that people should explore Newark. Oh, and also the Prudential Center. Maybe there's a show going on there. So I definitely think that tourists coming in.
Thank you, Judd, for starting us off. Listener texts, the Great Falls in Patterson. Then we have Liz in Neptune City. Hi, Liz. What you got?
Hi, Brian. I'm a big fan. Thanks for taking my call. So the Bruce Springsteen Center for American Music is opening this weekend at Monmouth University. And I'm an employee at Monmouth, and I got a sneak peek this past week, and the space is just incredible. It is a museum tribute to American music. They have Prince's suit and guitar, Kurt Cobain's guitar. There's so much amazing stuff on the ground floor. And then on the second floor is Bruce Springsteen's handwritten lyrics and tour posters and so much interactive exhibits. So a must visit.
Good one. Liz, thank you very much. Yeah, it's Morocco versus Brazil tomorrow. I wonder if people in Morocco or Brazil know Bruce Springsteen. But good tip. In any case, another in a text, take NJ Transit to Millburn, get a trail map from the library there, and hike South Mountain Reservation. They have lunch, then have lunch in Millburn, or take the train back to Maplewood and have lunch and walk down Maplewood, writes Katrina in Maplewood. How about Marianne in Middletown? You're on WNYC. Hi, Marianne.
Hi, Brian. Good morning. I can't recommend anything more than Asbury Park and the Stone Pony.
And there it is. A little nightlife from Marianne. And speaking of Bruce Springsteen, right? Here's another text. Turtleback Zoo in West Orange is great for tourists with kids. Great restaurant nearby is McClune's with a nearby nature walk. Deborah in Jersey City. Hi, Deborah. What you got?
Hey, yeah. If people want to get a idea of what skydiving is like, check out iFly. They have 2 locations, one in Paramus and one in Edison.
Skydiving, awesome. Not just being a spectator, but a participant. Let's go to Janice in Rutherford, near the stadium. Janice, you're on WNYC. Hi.
Hi, I'm calling because there's an awesome West End golf simulator place that you can go and play golf at anywhere in the world. And then they also are in association with a shuttle service that'll get you to the World Cup.
Good one. Thank you very much. Another text. The grounds for sculpture in Hamilton. Take NJ Transit to the Hamilton station. Come on July 1st to enjoy the Hamilton fireworks and concert in Veterans Park. 2. How about Nick in Union? Nick, you're on WNYC. Hi.
Hey, girls. Quiet for a second. Hey, Brian, how you doing? Long time listener, first time caller. So I have a company, and it's called Welcome Me NYC. And what we do is we do small group experiences. So to keep it real simple, imagine you have 3 of your best friends with you. You're in New York City or the area, and you have no idea what to do. But you have about 4 hours to burn. Give us an idea what you like and what you don't like, and we'll set everything up for you. For example, my daughter helped me to actually – there's one in Jersey City that actually overlooks the skyline of New York City. And to me, one of the best views of New York City is not from in the middle of Midtown, which we also do. We do rooftops in Midtown, New York City. But we also, you get started at the Cliff in Weehawken and end at a rooftop in downtown Jersey City, and we'll take you through different spots, different locations, different things that are known for great things, like Benny Todino's for one of the greatest slices of pizza in Hoboken that I know. You know, but beyond that, we can take you into the ambiance, we can give you the feeling, and really just make sure you enjoy what we can enjoy from the area and the time that you have without having to know all the ins and outs. We'll figure that out for you. Figure out what
Great stuff. Thank you, Nick. One more. Janet in West Orange. Hi, Janet. We have about 15 seconds for you.
Okay, everybody should come to the Thomas Edison National Historical Park, tour Thomas Edison's laboratories, fascinating, and also go and see his mansion, which is in West Orange, too. So please come and celebrate Thomas Edison.
Thank you very much, and I'll sneak in one more text. Listener just writes, Liberty Science Museum, New Jersey Symphony. Well, a lot of great stuff to do. Besides going to the games in Jersey, hopefully word will get out. We want to give you all those opportunities. Hopefully it will be a big financial boon for North Jersey as well as New York City as the World Cup begins locally tomorrow. And that's the Brian Lehrer Show for today. You know, we say goodbyes this weekend to our high school intern from this semester, Arlo Bivens, who did great work screening your calls and sometimes taking your abuse, doing research and excellent writing for the show. Great job, Arlo Bivens, from the New York City Public High School called the Institute for Collaborative Education. But as a footnote, they no longer go by their acronym. Institute for Collaborative Education used to be known informally as ICE. Not in 2026. Have a great weekend, everyone. Stay tuned for all of it. Thanks for listening to Brian Lehrer Weekend. We're back on the radio Monday morning at 10 a.m. In the meantime, follow us on Blue Sky at The Brian Lehrer Show, where there's always a conversation 24/7.